Welcome to the Coffee House, where in the next hour, the road to mass transit, MDOT Secretary John Porcari on Maryland's smart transportation strategy. Near Camp David, rebuilding bridges to the 20th century, covered bridges. Also, the social experiment known as Columbia, Maryland, a conversation with Gady Epstein about his three-part series in the Baltimore Sun. House and garden pesticides, how necessary, how dangerous, and a look at Montgomery County's new one-of-a-kind pesticide control law. We've got bluesman James Mabry and world music by Rachel and Jackie, and a Rebecca Villarreal poem. Hi, and welcome to the forum at the Coffee House. Call it visionary, call it practical, call it unrealistic. Maryland Governor Paris Glendening has a goal of doubling transit ridership by the year 2020. Washington and Baltimore roadways are among the most congested in the country, and that's why the governor argues there can be no smart growth without smart transportation. Smart growth aims to focus public resources on developed areas. The idea is spend tax dollars where people, business, and schools already are, where there already are sewer and water systems, where roads and transit networks already exist. It's more cost-effective for taxpayers. Less land gets swallowed up by development. It means fewer vehicle miles traveled to work and shop, and less pollution. Or, so goes the theory. John Porcari is charged with making smart transportation a reality in Maryland. He runs MDOT, the State Transportation Department. Welcome to the Coffee House.
Thank you, Mark.
What is smart transportation?
In a nutshell, smart transportation is putting our dollars, our transportation dollars, as you mentioned, where people live and work, and reinvesting in our older communities for a new generation of transportation using the latest technology.
Why?
First of all, we believe it's the right thing to do. We also believe that you simply can't build your way out of congestion if we continue with the past patterns.
Past patterns being building more roads.
Building more roads and only roads. Clearly, highways are a key part of our strategy, but so is doubling transit ridership, so is carpooling, vanpooling, HOV, telecommuting. When people ask, should we concentrate on highways, should we concentrate on transit, should we concentrate on telecommuting, the answer is yes, yes, and yes. Mm-hmm. We need to do all those.
And if we were to look at the budget, how would it break out? How much money is the state spending on more roadways or improving roadways, and then how much on transit?
Well, our total highway budget is the largest it's ever been. The bulk of that, over 50% of that, is just preserving the roads that we have. It's just rebuilding, for example, some of the older state roads, interstate and state roads. The transit portion of our budget has grown dramatically, and Governor Glendening and Lieutenant Governor Townsend gave us the goal of doubling transit ridership. I think it's both achievable and exciting.
And what does that mean in dollars and cents?
What it means is the latest installment on our transit vision is adding another $750 million over the next 6 years to do some very exciting things. Another 50 rail cars for Metro, in addition to the 200 that are already on order. Another 300 buses for Metro Bus. Rebuilding the Red Line tunnel that's leaking with water damage right now. $100 million for behind-the-scene infrastructure improvements at Metro. It means at the local transit systems, Ride-On in Montgomery and the bus in Prince George's, for example, dramatically increased funding for cross-county bus service as well.
Mm-hmm. Speaking of cross-county, we're now in the post-ICC Inter-County Connector era. What is your current thinking on east-west linkages and how that's going to be done in the future?
If you look at the report of the Transportation Solutions Group, which was the blue ribbon panel appointed by the governor a couple of years ago to look at solutions, we're implementing everything in there except the inter-county connector itself. For example, with routes 28 and 198, we're getting those to construction as quickly as possible because those improvements are needed right away. Some of the cross-county bus service, for example, from Laurel to Silver Spring, from Greenbelt to Montgomery Mall, is actually in this transit funding package. We're doing that. We have a very, very aggressive program of local road construction where we're improving intersections, interchanges, and doing immediate improvements, building facts on the ground, if you were. Those are all being implemented right now. In fact, if you look at the transportation spending since Governor Glendening and Lieutenant Governor Townsend took office, we've added $3.6 billion to our capital program.
And how does that compare with the past?
That is much higher than was added in any previous period. And
how much of that is for transit as opposed to roads?
Of that $3.6 billion, it's actually fairly evenly divided between the two.
And how does that compare with
which
the
is
past?
a big change from the past. Of the $3.6 billion that we've added since the governor and lieutenant governor took office, $870 million of it is for Montgomery County alone. 25% of all the statewide transit and highway money that's been added has been added right here in Montgomery County, and obviously because we need to do work here.
Let me ask you a question about Montgomery County, which has just extended its fleet of buses, and among them are 100 buses that are going to be fueled by natural gas.
Yes.
The state have any interest in doing something like that?
We have both an interest in doing that, and the state actually funded the increased cost of the natural gas vehicles.
Now, we should say that natural gas burns much more cleanly than gasoline and is less polluting.
Yes, it does, and we actually go and quantify the air emissions reductions because of it. Also, with the metro fleet, regionally, we're starting with 100 natural gas buses. We're already running those at Baltimore Washington International Airport, and you will see more and more of those statewide as the fueling stations, which are one of the key issues with natural gas buses, are built statewide.
One of the more interesting and novel approaches out there for lessening congestion on the roads is something that sometimes goes by the name of congestion pricing, sometimes hot lanes. Explain what that is and what is being considered for Maryland.
Basically, it's using an HOV type lane, but pricing it. People pay to use it like a toll facility. The charge would vary by time of day and congestion. It's worked very successfully in 2 examples in California, for example. They've been characterized as Lexus lanes.
Now, these don't have there's no tolls.
They do not have tolls. They use automatic technology through a transponder, for example, through a variation of a smart card or something like that to
Let's see if we can get
charge
a shot
a toll.
of this.
It has worked very successfully. They are not, as you might suspect, used only by wealthy people. They're used when that 1 day a month or 2 days a month when you need to save 15 minutes or 10 minutes on your way to work. If you're paying $1 a minute for every extra minute to pick up your child from daycare and you're late, it's worth it.
But isn't there something a little bit unnerving or of concern about creating a lane on a public transportation system that you can pay for high-speed access to individually? You mentioned that it isn't really just a Lexus lane, but isn't there some concern that maybe that's what it really is?
There are some concerns about it. Again, the experience where it's operational shows that it's used by everyone and that it works very well, and it adds significantly to highway capacity. We're currently in the middle of a statewide study that we're moving very aggressively on to determine whether we can use these high occupancy toll lanes in Maryland, and we are hoping to experiment with it. We think it has a lot of promise.
Would there be any earmarking of the revenues from these hot lanes to build the transit systems?
That's one possible use of it. We are already have taken some steps along those lines. The governor's $750 million new transit initiative above what he's already done. For example, some of the revenue comes from our Maryland Transportation Authority, which is our bridge and tunnel, our toll authority.
Governor Glendening recently came to Silver Spring, came to the metro station in Silver Spring to announce some of the new initiatives. Why don't you talk a little bit about what he was talking about there when he came to Silver Spring?
Well, for example, new bus service is just one aspect of a very, very ambitious program. We would have express buses from Columbia to Bethesda, NIH, for example. Reverse commute buses from Foggy Bottom out to Bethesda. Laurel to Silver Spring, Greenbelt to Montgomery Mall. One of the most exciting aspects of it is the smart card, for example, which we're going to be using statewide. There's over 100,000 of them in use in the metro system now. The local system here in Montgomery County, Ride On, we are paying for new fare boxes so you can use your smart card there. Eventually, you'll be able to use it statewide. You keep it in your wallet. You can get on transit anywhere in the state and use it. You don't have to worry about fishing for that change in your pocket. And we believe it's a more fair and certainly a more convenient system.
And Silver Spring is being touted as a transit center for the future.
Silver Spring really is one of our showcase intermodal centers, and both the current station, but especially the new station that'll be built there, where we'll have MARC and.
When will it be built?
The first phase is under construction now, which is to bring the MARC station to Silver Spring, to the metro station. The next phase of it, we hope, and we're doing this jointly with Montgomery County, to have under construction very soon. In part, it depends on a joint development proposal for a mixed-use development that's right at the station by a private developer. We would very much like to encourage that. It would bring office and retail uses right to the station.
MARC is the commuter train. There's been some bad experience, or relatively bad experience in Maryland with MARC in terms of the operation of it by CSX, or at least there's a feeling of that, and that there's been, in Virginia, CSX apparently gets people from one place to another more quickly, more often. At least that's what I've read.
Well, first of all, the Virginia system carries a fraction of the ridership of what MARC does. We have not been happy with the CSX service, and from the governor on down, we've made that very clear to everyone, including the chairman at CSX. We have written a new contract, which has now been adopted by the state, that for the first time puts incentives and disincentives in, where it rewards CSX for on-time performance and strongly penalizes them for late trains. It's a difficult situation with MARC because we don't own the track, and the MARC commuter trains are essentially competing with freight rail. We believe it can run well. We're expanding the MARC system. For example, the extension to Frederick will be open in the fall of 2001. We spent $90 million with new bi-level cars that add significantly to the capacity of MARC. We're adding the smart card technology to it. It will be a better running, better performing commuter railroad in the future.
And it'll get us eventually from the Washington area to BWI as well?
It does right now, actually. To
the Silver Spring, I'm thinking. Yeah.
Certainly from Union Station to the BWI Amtrak
sure.
MARC station. And weaving these systems together. You know, we have MARC, we have the metro system, we have Metro Bus, Ride On Bus, just in Montgomery County. Weaving these systems together, making the schedules mesh, making the stops, the bus stops correspond with each other, is some of the heavy lifting, as it were, that we're doing right now. Everything we can do to make transit more convenient is going to drive up ridership.
Very quickly, we're almost out of time, so I do want to get in a question about BWI and your opposition to the merger between US Air and United Airlines.
Sure. BWI is the second fastest growing airport in America and the most exciting airport in America. We are doing very, very well with 20 million passengers this year. We are opposing the United acquisition of US Airways for the simple reason it's beyond the effect on BWI in the state of Maryland. It drives competition out throughout the region. So from Philadelphia to Richmond, people will pay more for their tickets without the competition BWI. It's not overstating the case to say that the competition at BWI keeps all the airlines honest on ticket prices throughout the region. That's our goal.
Well, we thank you for it, and thank you for joining us in the coffee house.
Thank you.
MDOT Secretary John Porcari. Just how the new well-oiled Republican administration in Washington will affect smart transportation policy at the state level, we'll just have to wait and see. Still to come, the covered bridges of Frederick County, Columbia, Maryland, the dream and the reality. Montgomery County tightens the lid on household pesticides. Pat Afterheide reviews Before Night Falls. Bluesman James Mabry and world musicians Rachel and Jackie with a Rebecca Villarreal poem.
If you've heard of the town of Thurmont, Maryland, it's probably because of Camp David, the presidential retreat tucked away on Catoctin Mountain. Thurmont's also known for its stocked streams, its 78-foot waterfall at Cunningham Falls, its hiking trails through 10,000 acres of mountain parkland, and its historic restaurants and hotels. Lesser known, but familiar to travelers who like to explore backcountry roads, roads with names like Opossum Town Pike and Apples Church Road, are the county's 3 covered bridges, each over a century old.
We have artists that paint here. Any number of kids have grown up playing in the water in this bridge and fishing down here, and it's just, it draws a community together. You meet people you never would have met otherwise.
This bridge is the Lloyd Station. It was burned in 1991.
The whole neighborhood stood down here crying, watching it burn and timbers fall.
And shortly after that, in the spring of 1992, the Roddy Road Bridge was destroyed from an oversized truck that had gone through and broken a lot of the timbers. With all of these things happening, and the community was very upset about the condition of these bridges, and of course we're very attached to our bridges. We wanted to save them and preserve them. So we began, a grassroots movement to reconstruct this bridge, repair the Roddy Road Bridge, and then, of course, the Covered Bridge Society was born.
And through a lot of meetings and a lot of research and study, we were able to show that no, these bridges not only would bring in tourism dollars to the county and keep the community viable, but it was actually a more cost-effective way to do the bridge than to put in a modern concrete bridge. And we could take the same amount of weight and same equipment that a modern bridge could, and this one would actually last longer and require less maintenance dollars.
The county government helped cover the costs of restoring the bridges, but it took community pressure and bucks to do it right.
The county was planning to put a metal roof on this bridge, a ribbed metal roof, which we didn't feel was appropriate for the bridge. So as a volunteer group, we were selling shingles to put wooden shingles on this bridge. So for $1 a piece, we've involved infants that at that time were not even born yet. And we involved ancestors who were long passed away, as well as groups of family trees. So when you go through the Lloyd Station Bridge, look up at the ceiling and you'll find thousands of names written on the back of the shingles.
The county takes care of bridge maintenance, and neighborhood volunteers keep a watch out for problems and assist tourists.
These bridges don't just cross water. These bridges span generations. They go from one generation to the next generation. We in turn then teach them the oncoming generation. So we don't just span water, we span generations with these, and it's something to hold on to from our past. Because once these things are gone, they're gone. You don't bring them back, they're never the same. And this is a way to teach our children what came before them. And hopefully they in turn will pass it on to their children.
For the Weekend Traveler, I'm Chuck Barber.
Hi, and welcome to a second look at the Coffee House. In the town of Columbia, half an hour from Washington, an experiment in social engineering has taken place since 1967. Actually, Columbia is never really called a town, except maybe by naysayers who call it a test tube town. People in Columbia call it a planned community, or the next America. The idea was to create a way of living together to suit the 21st century. Well, here we are. Almost 2 generations later, has Columbia lived up to its promise? For an answer, Gady Epstein of the Baltimore Sun talked to dozens of Columbians, and he is with us in the Coffee House. Welcome, Gady.
Thanks, Howard.
James Rouse set up the
James
town.
Rouse, yeah.
James Rouse. No relation to James Rouse.
Right.
James Rouse set up the town of Columbia, so more than 3 decades ago. He had certain ideals, and in 25 words, what were those ideals?
Well, he wanted to create a town that was integrated both economically and ethnically, but also kind of organically built, where the services and the schools were all near to the people rather than built like a strip mall and then a subdivision unplanned. And his idea was to have this kind of organic community that would have these civic institutions that would be built upon these strong communities built around these schools and neighborhoods.
So, right, so racial integration, economic integration, and his structural idea was these circles, village centers, right? Where in the very center, what were stores and
essentially,
service
right.
places.
You'd have village centers, schools, not necessarily right in the geographic center, but you'd have a village center then surrounded by high-density housing, schools as well, where people could walk, kids could walk to school, walk to the village center, and
so these were people who lived in apartments or townhouses?
well, yeah, exactly. Right around the town,
right
around the schools and village centers, especially around village centers, you would have apartments and townhouses.
Right, high density
Right.
Folks. And then the single family homes
Would be outlying,
the outer circle.
generally.
And so generally speaking, the folks with less income were closer in, the folks with more income were
Exactly.
farther out.
It was actually planned out so that it would be convenient for lower income people to actually get to these services, as opposed to your average city that doesn't necessarily think about those things as it was building everything.
Right, right. Now, you and I weren't around when it started, but did it actually look like that at the beginning? I mean, that there was that folks sort of lived here in close proximity from all walks of life?
Definitely, and in the beginning, it certainly looked like that, except on a much smaller scale than anyone would imagine now if they looked in Columbia.
Right.
It was very small. It was such a small town in the beginning. Obviously, there was no one there to begin with. It would be 1,000 or 2,000 people at first, so small that Jim Rouse himself would get involved in making sure that it was an integrated community and making sure that there wouldn't be, let's say, in one development, if you'd heard that 4 or 5 houses had been sold all to black families, he would. They had actually people monitoring that to try and prevent that.
So to prevent an all-black area or an
Right,
all-white area.
exactly.
Right, right. So he supervised the.
So in the first year or two, he actually was monitoring that while he could, while it was small enough that he could actually really engineer it.
So, now you went to a place called Yellow Rose Court, a cul-de-sac of. And briefly, what does that place look like now? That's one little section of Columbia. And
Well,
actually, we have a clip of this. So if we can take a look.
Okay.
There it is. Yeah. Okay. Go ahead.
There
You
it
just
is,
talk
right.
about.
And it's essentially, if you looked at it at any point, especially during the day, you just drove by, you would not necessarily notice that it's any different from any other Columbia street.
But-
You'd have to spend some time there to
But
notice
behind the
differences.
facade, there's.
Well, there have been troubles. It's an off and on trouble spot, and that's kind of how Columbia trouble spots are. Generally, they'll be on as far as trouble goes for a few months, 6 months at a time.
What kind of troubles?
Could be, in the case of Yellow Rose Court and some other neighborhoods, it would normally be drug problems, or could be less serious things, vandalism, break-ins. Yellow Rose Court,
Sort of your typical
violence,
urban problem.
some fighting in the streets sometimes. That would happen. This is not something that was happening every single day, all day. It wasn't the kind of thing where you'd go by and think that this was a horrible neighborhood, even in the worst times, except when you were actually seeing it happen. It could be late at night, especially during the worst times in the summer. Summers of '97 and '99 were particularly bad for Yellow Rose Court. There would be lots of cars coming through every night. Police officers were believing that there was drug dealing going on, hand-to-hand drug buys, that there were houses that were centers of drug activity.
Right. And as a result of that, what we associate with a ghetto, let's say, quote unquote, has there also been what we associate with ghettos, in other words, white flight?
There has been some, and that's not just necessarily on Yellow Rose Court, but throughout the older neighborhoods of Columbia. There have been families leaving, and both impacted by crime and by what they see going on in the schools, which I think might have even had a greater effect. Both the two together did lead to to flight of families that are mostly white and affluent.
And so now do we have sections that are, in fact, are all black or are all white?
We don't have sections that are all black or all
no.
white. No.
Okay.
Columbia is, I would say, you're seeing a trend that, if it continues for a long period of time, could head in that direction. It's certainly more, looks more like that today than it ever has.
Right.
And that doesn't mean, though, that it's going to necessarily ever be all black, all white. But what you have are much less diverse areas than others. You have newer neighborhoods in Columbia that, especially River Hill, which is cited by a lot of people, which doesn't have affordable housing, which is a much higher percentage of white families than it was at the beginning of Columbia, than Columbia was at the beginning.
I think we also have a clip of that, yes.
Well, we have a clip of a nice neighborhood.
Yeah, it's River Hill.
It's River Hill Village Center there.
And so that is a more exclusive, sort of characteristically upper income suburban setting.
Right, and left behind are, especially noticed in the schools, higher percentages of lower income families and of black families. And it's not to the point where these neighborhoods are necessarily even majority black, but whereas the mix was much more stable back in the first 20 years of Columbia, 20% African American, these neighborhoods are seeing an increase in African American families, especially children going to these schools, and a sharp decrease, especially in the school-age population, of white families.
Right, so with close in, the close-in circles, in fact, have the predictable problem of lack of mobility to get out, so those families continue to stay there, whereas I think your point in the article was that in the outer rings, two things happen. One, either the people can get out, but also the people get older and they no longer have kids.
And this may not have been a too predictable problem at the beginning. You had really what may have been a little bit of a sociological, I think I used the word time bomb in the stories, where at the beginning this concept of having the high density housing near the village centers and the schools was a good idea planning wise, and it still is a great idea to have them walk to their services or their school for those families that don't have cars or don't have more than one car. But today we've seen, as these communities have aged, that especially as the newer neighborhood, the single family home neighborhoods have aged, that with less kids coming in from there, you have more kids pulled in redistricting to some of these elementary schools from higher density developments, and that has actually shifted the population in these schools. Parents noticed, in a combination with test scores, the standardized test scores haven't helped this situation.
Right, so in fact the schools are better predictor of of the trends, because the schools are much more segregated now.
You tend to notice this in the schools first, and we have 5 elementary schools in Columbia that are at or over majority or near majority black, which was, this is like twice the numbers of a decade ago.
So, set back from this for a minute. Do you think now, having looked at some of the failures, that it was just a foolish idea to start with? That
Not at all.
No?
I actually used to live in Florida, and I've seen what happens when you don't have planning. And you have strip mall after strip mall, and anybody will tell you if you go down US 19 on the west side of Florida or in parts of South Florida that it can look really ugly if it isn't well planned. And I think the beauty of the Rouse plan was they planned to preserve open space. They planned to have an integrated community near services. Those things worked to a degree. And in fact, overall, the town is very successful. And I think that they have a very strong economic core there. They've worked hard to bring in businesses and mixed use developments there.
So if you were a social engineer, you would prefer to go to Columbia and tinker with it than to go to Florida and the strip malls.
Certainly, and you might want to, exactly, tinker with it, make some changes. One thing you could do is what Montgomery County has done for, I think, more than 2 decades, which has had this moderately priced dwelling units law, where in each development of a certain size, there is some affordable housing set aside, or there's money that goes into an affordable housing fund. That helps spread out economic integration throughout the community, rather than leading to a situation where in Columbia, Rouse wanted to split up the poor. He didn't want to have one downtown center of which he called the ghettos of the cities that we built. So he split it up into these village centers, 9 village centers and town center. But what has happened is that miniature versions of those city downtowns have developed.
Right, the miniature Baltimores exist now in
Right, not
Columbia.
quite on the level
Not quite
of Baltimore. These are still pretty safe
Yeah,
areas
pretty nice
by
areas.
comparison.
Well, so would you say overall there's more optimism or more pessimism on the part of folks who you interviewed?
Oh, well, I think it really, I would say there's more pessimism than there was 10 years ago, from what I can tell. Well, some people who moved in the late 1980s and early 90s who were very disappointed by what they saw. And I think there was a problem of expectations. Columbia succeeded so well in the first 2 decades that what they thought they were coming to was this, successful, great suburb with great schools. And they didn't realize that they're coming to a city. And I think there is pessimism on that front.
Is enough optimism to keep it going? I mean,
I hope so. There's a lot of defenders of Columbia, and they came out in force when this story ran. And I hope that they do rally around Columbia, and I hope that they actually focus on the issues they do have rather than worry about their image, which is one problem that Columbia has.
Great. Well, let's leave it there. Thanks to the Baltimore Sun's Gady Epstein for joining me in the coffee house. I suppose there'll always be a question about planned communities. Is the whole idea a silly vanity, or is it a good and proper impulse, even a necessity? Whichever, Columbia will be around for the foreseeable future to give us its own unique answer. Coming up, the controversial film Before Night Falls, Blues by James Mabry, and the world sounds of Rachel and Jackie. I'm Howard Cohn, and this has been A Second Look.
And God said, let there be tour groups, and let them have straps. Straps for camera bags, straps for fanny packs, straps for backpacks, straps for video cameras. And let them wear beige walking shoes and sandals with beige rubber soles. And let them travel in packs of 20 or more, carrying maps and books and hats and glasses. Let the dust crawl on the tips of their shoes and the cuffs of their pants. Or where shorts are donned, let it cling to the hair on their ankles. Let them trip and stumble often for their habit of looking up and not down. Let them be aligned in a fan emanating from a guide speaking in the lilt of a country not their own, competing with the guide next door and the murmurs of the skirts and trousers. Turn the camera horizontal, no vertical, this way, no that, turn it, and be happy for the 1,000th shot left in a door once the plane has landed and the bags are unpacked.
I've just watched the award-winning movie Before Night Falls for the 3rd time. It's the life story of the gay Cuban writer Reinaldo Arenas, as visualized and retold by director Julian Schnabel. Reinaldo Arenas wrote vivid and fantastic prose and poetry. He was imprisoned in Castro's Cuba for his homosexuality, and he fled to the United States in 1980. Before he died of AIDS in 1990, he managed to complete his memoirs, same title as the movie. The director, Julian Schnabel, is a New York art world celebrity, a painter and now a filmmaker. You might have seen his only other movie, Basquiat. So how does a painter capture the work of a writer? Schnabel mines Arenas' work for word pictures that he turns into striking images like this scene.
The most extraordinary event of my childhood was provided by the heavens. Water rushed down gutters, reverberating over the zinc roof like gunfire. A massive army marching across the trees, overflowing, cascading, thundering into barrels. A concert of drums, water falling on water, drenched and whistling and out of control. And under the spell of violence, let loose that would sweep away almost everything in its path. Trees, stones, animals, houses. It was the mystery of destruction, the law of life. As I saw it, the currents were writing my name.
You have to understand that Reinaldo Arenas was not just a mistreated poet. He was a kind of open wound of left politics in the 80s. Miami Cubans made him a stick to beat Castro with. Gay activists made him a symbol of gay rights. New leftists took him for a right-wing pawn. And meanwhile, Arenas hated Castro, but he wasn't a politician. He was somebody who associated both writing and sex with pure freedom. Schnabel has captured the passion of this remarkable writer with plenty of help from Spanish actor Javier Bardem, who plays Arenas. The politics of the era are not forgotten either. We watch Castro issuing the first censorship declarations, and the film's website creates links to human rights organizations. And catch the tone of Arenas once he goes into exile.
Ahora, por el momento, Reinaldo Arenas, un escritor cubano, exiliado, vivo en Nueva York. Y bueno, me dedico a escribir y a sobrevivir. Y aquí el estatus que me ha dado el Departamento de Justicia es el stateless. Eso quiere decir que yo desde el punto de vista legal no existo. Estoy en el aire y no tengo ningún país. No soy religioso, soy homosexual y a la vez soy anticastrista. Eso quiere decir que yo creo que reúno todas las condiciones para que no se me publique nunca un libro y para vivir al margen de toda sociedad en cualquier lugar del mundo.
You'll also enjoy a few star turns from some of Schnabel's friends. Sean Penn plays a cranky peasant, and Johnny Depp plays both a transvestite prisoner and a prison guard. This is Depp as the prisoner.
I heard that you can get things in and out of here. Could you carry a package for me? Of course, he denied it.
I don't know what you're talking about.
The story of Before Night Falls stays focused on Reinaldo Arenas and about a search for freedom that transcends political limits. It tells that story with flourish and with heart. Good luck and good viewing.
I have had my fun. If I don't get well no more, I have had my fun. If I don't get well no more, my health is failing me, and I believe I'm going down slow. Please write my mother, tell the shape I'm in. please write my mother, tell the shape I'm in. Tell her to pray for me and to forgive me my sin. Tell her don't send no doctor. Doctor can't do me no good. Tell her don't send no doctor. Doctor can't do me no good. It's my own fault. I haven't done the things I should. Tell me about it, Jock. Mama, don't you worry. This is all I ask for in my prayer. Mama, please don't you worry. This is all I ask for in my prayer. Just tell everybody your son is going off somewhere, somehow.
Hi, and welcome to In Sickness and in Health at the Coffee House. They kill those annoying creatures that invade our homes or damage our gardens. But get trigger happy with roach killer on your countertop or weed killer on your lawn, and these pesticides may make you sick. Maybe not today or tomorrow, but perhaps years down the road. And guess what? You may be exposed to these toxins without ever even touching a pesticide product. That's why Montgomery County recently passed a law, the first of its kind, to toughen standards on how pesticides are handled and sold. I bet my guest thinks that's a good start. Greg Kidd is Science and Legal Policy Director at Beyond Pesticides, National Coalition Against the Misuse of Pesticides. Welcome to the Coffee House, Greg.
Oh, thank you.
These pesticides are used on ants and roaches and weeds and fungi that are so much smaller than us. Are they really safe for us, or are we okay?
Well, the fact is that pesticides are poisons. That's something that people have to keep in mind when they're using pesticides. That's particularly true for homeowners who may use pesticides in a much more casual way than a professional pesticide applicator. I mean, the classic example is someone that instead of spraying just a small amount at a pest might empty half a can, thinking that if a little bit does a good job, more is going to do better, and that's not a good approach.
Or even like 6 seconds, maybe too much. You really want to just, yeah. What about children and the relationship of pesticides to children? Is far more alarming than originally thought. Is that not the case?
Well, the fact is that in 1993, the National Academy of Sciences published a report called Pesticides in the Diets of Infants and Children, and in that report they pointed out that children really are not miniature adults. Their metabolism's higher. They have less of an ability to detoxify certain chemicals, including pesticides, and they're just more vulnerable to pesticides and the effects that pesticides might have.
There are warnings on the labels, tiny print, lots and lots of different things that are said on the packaging. I wonder if anyone reads them all thoroughly. What is being done to try and improve the safety of these products?
Well, I mean, the EPA is charged with, the Environmental Protection Agency is charged with regulating pesticides. As far as increasing the safety of the pesticides, I guess through trying to better educate the public and the users of pesticides, that may be one approach that has been taken to try and improve the safety. But the fact is, pesticides are actually a combination of chemicals. The active ingredient is not the only component in a pesticide formulation.
The one on the label.
The one on the label that's actually supposed to kill the pest. There are also inert ingredients in pesticides that might make up to 99% of the formulation, which are not disclosed on the label, and the inert ingredients can sometimes be as hazardous as the active ingredient.
But they're not required to be listed?
Well, they're considered confidential business information, actually, in the formulation. So pesticide formulators have been able to avoid putting those, listing those chemicals on the labels.
Now, Montgomery County's done an unusual thing that may be copied elsewhere. We don't know yet. It's a very new law. When will this take effect, and what exactly does it mean when you go to your supermarket? You're going to have to hunt in a special place for your pesticides?
Right. Well, as I understand it, the law was enacted on December 14th and will become active in 90 days. And that will also then include regulations that go along with the enactment of that law. And in a nutshell, what the law is all about is it will require retailers and handlers of pesticides to hold them separate from any kind of food product, any kind of cosmetic products. I mean, basically what the idea is that to demonstrate to the consumer that pesticides are in fact hazardous products, they deserve to have their own separate area removed from any kind of food products. And as I understand it, retailers will also be required to provide consumers with information about alternatives to pesticides.
Could you perhaps talk about a few of those alternatives now? I mean, what can we do if we're not to buy the product and get rid of those annoying pests?
Well, there's actually a spectrum of approaches that one can employ to control pests other than chemical pesticides, including simple things like sealing cracks and crevices in your house to keep the pests from coming in, making sure that you maintain good sanitation practices, and that's good for insect pests and rodent pests. There are products like diatomaceous earth or silica gels, which actually act to dry out the insects, and they are harmless to organisms other than insects. So there are a variety of approaches that people can take other than the standard chemical pesticide approach to pest management.
Boric acid for ants, that was another one you mentioned.
Yeah, boric acid's a good example, and this is true for outdoor pest control too, like weed control. I mean, there are measures that people can take in their lawn care that would not require them to apply herbicides to their lawn, including just proper mowing, good thatch removal, aeration of the soil. There's a variety of approaches that people can take.
If you're going to use Roundup, perhaps for the occasional weed, should you wear a mask or make sure the wind's not blowing at you? And how should we regard these chemicals?
Well, the most important thing to do if you're going to be a home user of pesticides is to carefully read the label and apply the pesticide at the rate that's suggested or required
as
really on
as
the
possible.
label.
Yeah.
Exactly. Use common sense. Make sure your children and your pets are not going to be allowed on your lawn if you've applied pesticides for the recommended amount of time. Certainly make sure that it's not a windy day, for instance, so you're not worrying about drift.
Without being too alarmist, I mean, it's very hard to pinpoint what damage these pesticides may be doing, because in the short term you may show no symptoms, but could you talk about some of the longer term symptoms that cause much more serious illnesses than perhaps just itchy eyes, temporary itchy eyes.
Sure. I mean, the problem with pesticides is they are insidious in a lot of ways, and the problem is that there are a host of chronic health effects associated with exposure to
Such
pesticide.
as?
Cancer is a big one. Birth defects are related to certain types of pesticides. Neurological problems. There are pesticides that actually will break down the myelin sheath, which is what goes around, right, and nerve cells for nerve transmission. So there's a host of problems that are associated with chronic exposure to pesticides, and the difficulty is it's hard to establish that the pesticide that you used 20 years ago and maybe over an extended amount of time is actually responsible for the health problems that you're suffering now, but there are studies that link those.
I guess what's difficult to tell is some people are more susceptible to these toxins than others, and how much spraying is too much. You know, even if you follow the label, if you do it every day, it may, or in a child's bedroom, it may cause far more damage than you're realizing.
Certainly true.
Could you talk just very briefly about the scandals, I guess, with DDT, and most recently Dospan has been pulled off the market as being too dangerous to use.
Sure.
Yet people were using it for years before that.
Well, that's an interesting thing about pesticides, and certainly recently there's been a number of actions taken by EPA to remove some pesticides from the market. We would argue that the removal rate is far too slow. They're allowing a phase out, which could take up to 4 or more years before people stop using. Dursban is a good one. Diazinon was recently, there was a recent agreement with Diazinon.
To allow it to be there a little longer.
Right, so there's a phase out right now.
Yeah.
It's a voluntary agreement with the manufacturer of the pesticide.
Plus perhaps some of the others that we don't know yet for sure that are dangerous, so they're just use them carefully, I guess.
That's right.
That's a big thank you to Greg Kidd of Beyond Pesticides for joining me in the coffee house. Next time a bug really bugs you, hold your fire and think through your options. I'm Kathy Christensen, and this has been In Sickness and in Health.
Sadie, my lady, in your faded print dress, under your apron, brown baby at your breast. Ayo, ayo, rhythm of the washboard, steady as a drum. Mama's little angel in the Carolina sun. Ayo, ayo, listen, my darling, to the rhythm of things, to the words that we sing. They play in the shadows of Kilimanjaro, asleep in the roots of the baobab tree. Angels in Africa, yeah, yeah, yeah. Sweating in the factory nearly 30 years. 3 mouths to feed, noise of progress in his ears. Ayo, ayo, sing songs of Sadie to your little ones. Steel upon steel, beating like a drum. Ayo, ayo, listen, my darling, to the rhythm of things, to the words that we sing. They play in the shadows of Kilimanjaro, asleep in the roots of the baobab tree. Angels in Africa, yeah, yeah, yeah. a seat on the transatlantic jet. Ayo, ayo, looking out the window, twilight in her eye. Sadie sees the angels floating in the sky. Ayo, ayo, they play in the shadows of Kilimanjaro, asleep in the roots of the baobab tree. Angels in Africa, yeah, yeah, yeah. They play in the shadows of Kilimanjaro, asleep in the roots of the baobab tree. Angels in Africa, yeah, yeah, yeah. They play in the shadows of Kilimanjaro, asleep in the roots of the baobab tree. Angels in Africa, yeah, yeah, yeah. Angels in Africa. Power, oh. Angels in Africa, yeah, yeah, yeah. Angels in Africa. Power, oh.
That's it for now. See you next time in The Coffee House.